Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we investigate 4 extreme haunted houses, from a spirit who enjoys waking guests up at midnight, as well as the little ghost boy who is always watching. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Let's begin. Let me just preface this story and say that I've always experienced strange, supernatural things since I was little. Currently 27F. I was much more open to it when I was younger. This experience was one of the most profound supernatural experiences I've had, and something I still think about. Back in around 2010, my family relocated and moved to a home in Arizona. At the time of this story, I was 14 years old. The home was built in the 1980s with sort of a strange floor plan, and only had one previous owner. From what the neighbors told us, an elderly couple had lived here. The wife passed a few years before, and the husband lived there alone after that. The neighbors said as he got older, he was going a little senile, digging holes in the yard and coming up with strange projects like putting out globs of rock and cement in the yard. He was moved to an elderly home, then passed away shortly after. That's when my family moved in. Right off the bat, I felt that the home had a weird energy. As I mentioned, it had a strange floor plan. The dining room was in the center, sort of walled off into a circle. When you walked in the front door, my parents' room was to the right. Then continuing around the circle, you would be in the living room, then kitchen, and then you'd be facing the office. And to your right, there was a wing that went down the hallway to my room and my brother's room. From above, the house looked like a lollipop. Hope that helps visualize it better. We started renovations pretty quickly after moving in. Painting, cleaning, ripping things out in the backyard. We found a large human tooth in the bathroom drawer one day. It was weird and gross, but I've heard about spiritual ties to human teeth, so I wanted to throw that in there. For some reason, whenever I think about this house, I always think of that tooth. While living in this house, I always had the feeling of being watched. There were strange noises, an eerie feeling. When walking around the circle, I always felt like someone was right behind me. We all felt sort of creeped out in the home, but nothing serious had ever really happened until one night. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and heard someone in boots running in the house. It sounded like they were doing laps around the circular dining room. I thought this was odd, then sat up in bed. I slept with my door open. Across the hall, I could see my brother in his room sleeping. My parents slept with talk radio on all night every night. Strange, I know. So I could hear the radio on the other side of my house and could hear my dad snoring. These footsteps sounded heavy. I didn't think it could be from my mom. Mentally, I was ruling out that it was anyone in my family making this noise. The stomping continued. I was getting concerned. My dog typically slept in the office on the couch. I thought to myself, if he starts barking, then I'll get worried. Right after thinking that, I hear the footsteps run into the office, then papers start rustling around, and my dog starts growling and barking. The paper stops, my dog stops, and it's quiet for a moment. I thought that it was over, until I hear the footsteps running down the hallway towards my room. I'm absolutely frozen, believing that I'm about to see either a spirit or an intruder. My door is to the left of me, wide open. As the footsteps come closer and get louder, they suddenly stop right before where my doorway starts. I sat there frozen, waiting for someone to peer their head around the corner or something, but nothing happens. It was silent after that. This whole scenario lasted maybe 3 minutes. The next morning, I confronted my mom. I asked her if she had been running around the house in boots. She told me no, that I must have been dreaming. She told me that her and my dad were in their room all night. I started to maybe think that I had imagined the whole thing. A week later, she told me she wanted to talk. She didn't want to scare me at the time, but she told me that night she had heard it too. The footsteps, my dog barking, the papers rustling. She said that she was about to get up and check, also worried it was an intruder, but it had come to a stop. All doors were locked that night. Nothing was stolen or left ajar. We lived in an extremely safe town. Both her and I believe it was a spirit, likely the old man who lived in the house before us. We continued to feel watched and could feel a strange passive-aggressive presence. but never experienced something to this capacity again. We still talk about this experience from time to time. I'm glad I wasn't the only one who was awake in my house that night to hear it. A few years later, we had moved out, and strangely, a friend of mine had moved in. When I found out he lived in the house, I asked him if he felt a strange presence or ever had anything happen to him there. His dad and him both looked at me wide-eyed and told me yes, they felt it too. When I was around 10 years old, we moved into a small one-story house. It was just me, my mom, and my brother, as well as our pit bull. When we first moved into the house, we noticed that one of the back rooms just didn't feel right. It was cold, and just gave us a weird vibe, so we never really used it except for storage. Nothing apart from the back room really stood out about the house. However, at some point, that just changed. The first paranormal encounter that I remember was later that night. My mom used to keep sodas in her room so we wouldn't steal them, but she's a heavy sleeper. I was able to sneak my fair share. However, one night I went to go sneak into my mother's room. Her door was about halfway open. As I went to step into her room, a loud series of banging proceeded almost as if someone was knocking on her door, but really hard. The shock knocked me down, and my mother sprang up. My mom said she wasn't sure what happened, but she remembers the look of pure terror in my eyes when she noticed me. After that night, the weird paranormal experiences ramped up. I've seen the door that leads to the eerie room open by itself multiple times. We even did an experiment where, before we went out to dinner, we closed it, pushed on it, and did whatever, just to make sure it couldn't just open by itself. Also, the door handle was a knob, not a handle, so our dog wouldn't have been able to open it either. When we came back to the house, sure enough, the door was wide open. I remember one afternoon I walked into the kitchen and saw one of our plastic spoons fall onto the counter, like something dropped it. I've seen my hangers in my closet rattle like crazy even when my AC was off. I've even heard the floor in my room creaking like someone was walking right up to my bed. I've had something bang on the shower door mid-shower and knock the towel off of the hanger thing we'd use. I thought it was my brother trying to mess with me, but my mom confirmed that it really wasn't him since he was with her the whole time. My mom works from home. I'd hear her keyboard tapping away all night long, knowing there is nobody awake besides me. My dog would sit in my doorframe, just staring down the hall and growl. She'd do this for hours. I even have a video of her doing it. Weirdest part of the house by far was the room that we had an eerie feeling in. The paint in it start to peel. There would be like strips of the ceiling dangling. Paint from the wall literally curling. Honestly, just weird, freaky stuff. We found out later by one of our friend's moms that a middle schooler actually hung himself in the closet of that weird room, which really freaked us out because we didn't find that out till we almost moved. We ended up leaving the house about 5 years ago. Looking back, I've seen some weird stuff that as a 23-year-old I just cannot explain, but it hasn't stopped. Well, for me anyway. My mom moved into her new house. She hasn't had anything weird happen to her. However, me on the other hand is a different story. I had my guitar picks fly off my desk. I'll see shadows walk past my door. And the weirdest experience yet happened last night, which actually prompted me to tell my story. For context, I live out in California, and I'm currently on the East Coast visiting. I haven't been in my mom's house in a while. However, I was sitting at my old desk talking with my buddies on Discord. I peeled off the gift card code thing since it was for DoorDash, and I was hungry. I put the little strip of tape or whatever that was onto my desk, which at this point was rolled up. While I was waiting for my food to get here, I saw two things floating past my face. At first, I thought it was like a bug or something like a mosquito, but whatever it was landed on my desk. When I looked at it, I saw that it had letters on it and was silver. Then more of the things fell onto my desk. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Then I realized it was that strip that I had just peeled off, but it was torn into pieces. I even checked the spot where I had tossed the strip before, and it wasn't there. I picked up the pieces, went downstairs to my mom and said, "You won't believe this." Honestly, I've maybe had like 1 or 2 weird things happen to me since I've been in California, but nothing like this. If it was a ghost or whatever, I didn't even think that was possible. I'm the second oldest of 5 children from the ages of 9 to 13 years old. I lived in a very active haunted home. People are always so dismissive when I describe living there, so I've stopped telling the story, but I'm making an exception for this. I grew up in South Florida. The house really wasn't that old in the grand scheme of things. I think it was built in the mid-1970s. We have all of the classic stuff like disembodied voices, footsteps, knocks, shadows, there appear then disappear in a second, lights flicking on and off, the actual switch, not just a flickering light. There were some truly terrifying moments. The first week we lived there, I had the same dream of a young Hispanic woman killing herself, every single night. But it was always different. The first time she hung herself. Then the next night she tied something to her foot and drowned in the pool. Then she slit her wrists, drank, and took pills. It was every night that first week, but I would dream about her sporadically for the rest of my time there. There was this constant unnerving feeling of being watched by something you couldn't see, but you sense it was there. My bedroom was the most active, unfortunately. I experienced several instances of being touched, pinched, and even heard my name called and whispered while staying in there. I've always enjoyed writing and had a nice big desk in my room that I loved. One day, I asked my mom to pick me up a new journal when she went to the store. As soon as I got it, I set it on my desk, closed and clasped, without a pen, ready to write after going to the bathroom. After returning, every single page of my new notebook had been scribbled on with some being torn out and crumpled on my floor. This freaked me out, obviously, because I had only been gone maybe 2 minutes. The journal was closed with the little clasp locked, and all of my pens were put away. When I told my mom, she blamed my siblings, assuming I had lied about the amount of time I was gone. It just wasn't possible with how thick the journal was for my twin toddler siblings to have scribbled. It looked more like aggressive scratches with a pen on every single page within the 2 minutes it took me to go pee, let alone the strength it would have taken to rip out the pages from my new hardcover journal. Later that week, my little sister and I saw a t-shirt lift up out of my laundry hamper, then flew across my room and eventually fall to the floor after running into my TV. The fact that I still slept in there after seeing that blows my mind, but I was a child and neither of my parents believed me. On a different occasion, I was just grabbing something out of my room to go to the living room because I hated being in there. My bedroom had 2 slatted closet double doors that you had to pass by to leave. On this day, they were open as I grabbed what I needed and turned to walk out the door. I saw a small figure of a boy sitting on my closet floor. He had his knees pulled up to his chest. He was rocking back and forth. He looked about 3 or 4 years old and had dark brown hair, with obvious tears streaking down his cheeks. The strangest part was that he had fire trucks for feet. To this day, I still try to rationalize this, but I have no idea. The best I can come up with is that maybe they were slippers. Anyway, his lips were blue, and his skin was so gray he looked dead. I ran out of there and didn't go back in alone for a few days. The final straw with my bedroom was when I had to stay home alone for a week from school, with strep throat and tonsillitis. Both of my parents were at work, and all of my siblings were in school when it happened. I was sitting up in my bed with my legs under the covers watching something on TV. My point is that I was wide awake when this all occurred. I heard footsteps walk down the hall toward my bedroom. Then it stops right in front of my closed door. From this moment forward, I was kind of froze, like fight, flight, or freeze. I was so terrified but couldn't move a muscle. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this, but my door creaked open and I could feel the presence of someone or something ominous enter. The audible footsteps, my bedroom had carpet floors so I shouldn't have been hearing any footsteps at all, continued, and whatever this was approached my bed. I felt it sit down at my feet, on top of the covers. I literally saw the blankets and mattress lower with the indentation of a body. That's when I snapped out of whatever was going on with me, threw my blanket off, and ran out of my room. From that day forward, I only went into my room to grab necessities, slept every night on the couch in the living room. It's sad because I truly loved my bedroom. It was the first room I had that I didn't have to share with a sibling, and I painted it myself. My point is that I loved my bedroom, I made it my own and didn't want to leave it, but I just never felt safe in there again. I turned 30 in a couple months, and I still have bizarre nightmares about that room. Of course, the activity wasn't exclusive to just my bedroom. I experienced many things after that, where I slept in the living room and all over the house, honestly. It got so bad that I started sleeping immediately after getting home from school, when everyone else was awake, to stay up at night with all the lights on to remain vigilant. Monstrous-looking things would peer in through the living room windows at night, or try to call to me down the hallway. I did my best to ignore it, but that did happen often. Anyway, over the course of our time there, my parents grew to hate each other. My dad slid further into alcoholism. All of our mental states got significantly worse. My parents divorced, the house went into foreclosure, and ended up sitting vacant for close to 5 years. The Halloween just after turning 14, my mom, siblings, and I were renting a different house in a different city at this point, but our old house wasn't foreclosed on yet. My older sister and her friends invited me to go back with them and do a seance. I agreed, so stupid I know. We packed a cooler full of alcohol and brought candles, bread, and wine for the offering. We did research beforehand and wanted to be respectful. Obviously, now I know the respectful thing would have been to have just left it alone. But my sister's friends didn't believe us about the haunting, so we wanted to show them. The house hadn't changed much other than there being no electricity and everything being closed, locked up. Most of our belongings were still there. We only took the bare minimum when we moved. Anyway, we set everything up, held hands, repeated the words. That's when it began. All the candle flames started to rise at the same time as something out of a cheesy horror movie. It started as a gentle tapping on the sliding glass doors behind us that eventually grew louder and more violent. It turned to knocks and then banging that came from all different directions with no identifiable source. We started to hear whispers, then full-blown conversations, but I couldn't make out the words. Then something that sounded like an argument between a man and a woman coming from none other than my bedroom. It all came to a climax when we heard something being thrown, then glass shattering. We all jumped up at the same time, releasing our hands. Then the candles blew out on their own. Freak out, we grabbed our flashlights and tried to figure out what broke. When we explored my room, that's when I saw it. A framed childhood photo of me had been thrown off the wall onto the floor across my room by my closet doors, and the glass on it had shattered. That's when we left. To this day, my mom denies that anything happened in that house. Although she had been grabbed in her sleep several times and witnessed the fear in literally all of her children living there. My little brothers and older sister don't like to talk about it, but I was just recounting stories with my little sister on the phone yesterday, so this is all very fresh in my mind. One of things that was there, whatever was really dark, followed us to the next house we rented, but that's for another story. I bought my first house in 2003. Shortly after moving in, 2 of my neighbors began joking with me about the ghost in my house. Well, I thought they were joking, so I just played along pretending I had seen one. It was no big deal. Well, as time went on that summer, I met more and more of my neighbors. They all brought up the same topic. Finally, an elderly woman on the block who was quite kind and friendly told me the story after I'd asked her. I knew she wasn't going to screw with my head, which is why I asked in the first place. Turned out the previous owner purchased the home and never lived there because she said it was haunted. Sounds in the night of footsteps, sobbing, and glimpses of a man sitting in the kitchen covered in blood. One of my neighbors helped with the renovations of the house. He said that he was putting up dry wall when he felt something lift up his dreadlocks. Though I've had paranormal experiences before, it had been years. By then I just chalked it up to night terrors. One day, I went to a small neighborhood video store to rent a movie. I had to fill out a form with my demographic data, then my credit card info. The owner of the store looked at the form and said, "Oh my God, you live in that house." I asked her what she meant. She explained that her former employee had committed suicide in my house. She came to the house as soon as she'd heard, but the house had been taped off by police as a potential crime scene. She told me that he had just moved into the house with his partner. He called his mom because he wanted to invite her over to meet his partner and come out to her. This was in the early 90s when being gay was a big deal. His mother already knew he was gay because he bought a house with a man. She disowned him right over the phone. That same week, he received a letter from an HIV testing center stating he had tested positive for HIV. This is when HIV was a death sentence. He then sat at the kitchen table, ate a bowl of cereal, and shot himself in the head with a revolver. Since then, she has had multiple paranormal experiences in the store, with videos flying off shelves and even levitating off shelves. The only thing I experienced was sounds of Cheerios being poured into a bowl. I don't eat cereal. With sounds of sobbing in the kitchen, I often awaken to both. I remember my grandmother saying, "When the dead come to you, they want something. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them." So, I did. I sat down at the kitchen table one night, lit a candle, and told him that each night I would recite a novena prayer for him before a lit candle. On the 9th night of the first novena to Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost souls, I heard uncontrollable sobbing. I felt a strong presence of grief and despair, as well as the sound of hyperventilating breathing, as though someone could not catch their breath. I sat in the presence of this knowing it was not malignant, but rather a connection of intimacy and compassion, of which he was in need. For 45 days, I said a novena prayer before a lit candle for his soul, and had a mass in his name. A few times I had awakened to feel his presence standing over my bed, but knew it was not a malignant presence. This still happens from time to time, but less and less frequently. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.